This is our panel discussion on the struggle for abortion rights. We have three folks who are deeply involved in provisioning abortion care and reproductive care, fighting on the legal side, and then also doing student organizing. And so we have experts who are going to help us understand the situation we're in after the Dobbs decision, the road ahead, just to protect and expand a right to abortion and win that back, and what's happening in individual states, but also the broader picture of reproductive rights, because the Dobbs decision and the right wing's onslaught right now is having a big effect on healthcare in general, because they're going after a lot more than just abortion rights. So thank you all so much for being here. We have with us Bridget Winkler, who's with the National Women's Law Center, Pamela Merritt with Medical Students for Choice, as well as Lauren Morrissey. Bridget is going to start us off. So Bridget, please introduce yourself and make whatever opening statement you like.
Hi, everyone. My name's Bridget Winkler. Just going to start by apologizing for my very scratchy and annoying voice. It is currently conference season, so I've been flying around and going to different abortion conferences for the last couple of weeks, and I'm currently in California, so on Pacific time, but so thank you for bearing with me, but my pronouns are she, her. I am a reproductive rights and health legal fellow at the National Women's Law Center. The Law Center is an organization of advocates, experts, and lawyers taking on issues that are central to the lives of women and girls. We drive change in the courts, in public policy, and in our society, especially for women of color, LGBTQ people, and low-income women and families. I work primarily on the federal abortion team, which means I work very closely with the Biden administration and administrative agencies such as HHS to expand on existing protections and to think about ways that we can protect abortion access moving forward. Recently, something that's been introduced into my portfolio is medication abortion. It's something I had worked on a lot and written a lot of papers about and done a lot of research on when I was in law school. So I'm excited now to be kind of bringing some of that into my work as a working attorney. So I'm also a huge fan of student organizing. The work that I did in law school with my colleagues and in different student organizations that I was involved with really helped inform who I am as an attorney today. So if anyone has questions about student organizing and things like that, I'd love to talk about that too. So I will pass it off to Lauren.
Please go ahead, Lauren. Yep.
Awesome. I'm going to quickly share my screen so you have a little bit of the information about SCRJ. Can everyone see that? Great. Wonderful. So hi, everyone. My name is Lauren Morrissey. I use she, they pronouns, and I am the co-founder and co-director of the Student Coalition for Reproductive Justice. We were founded back in 2019. We are a chapter-based coalition of students and alumni on Catholic University campuses that are organizing to expand access to sexual and reproductive health care, through peer-guided education, distribution of free, safe sex supplies to students, and building a culture of sex positivity on campus. Not a lot of people may know, but there has been and continues to be a growing public health crisis on Catholic college campuses across the country. Almost 700,000 students cannot access basic healthcare through their campus health centers due to the university's Catholic doctrine. This includes, but is not limited to, restrictions on access to contraception, STI testing, PrEP and PEP. And if you receive a pregnancy test and you are found to be pregnant, you will most likely be referred to what's called a crisis pregnancy center for care. Crisis pregnancy centers are fake anti-abortion clinics that use a variety of manipulation tactics and techniques to persuade people into keeping their pregnancies. So very substandard quality of care and actively putting students in danger. And when I was an undergrad, I got together with students at different Catholic universities across the country, and we just said, no more. This is time. It's got to stop. The insidious effects of these policies are clear. I even like to say at times that, especially our chapters that are based in rural areas are already living in a pre-Roe reality. It didn't really matter with Dobbs. Nothing really particularly has changed about their ability to access care. And so students are really working to step up and provide that care and take care of their peers. We have students in several states and at very large Catholic universities and very small Catholic universities. I like to say also that our work is not limited also to Catholic universities. If your university is actively denying you sexual and reproductive health care access, please reach out to me. My email is on the slide, as well as our website and our Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. But yeah, I'm really excited to talk to you all today about student organizing in particular. I feel like there is a misconception in particular that students at private schools, because they go to private schools, can fully access and fully afford the full spectrum of sexual and reproductive health care on campus. It's also a misconception that these students don't care about reproductive justice in particular. And so we are working to have our universities, through their policies and through the way that they treat students, fully embrace reproductive justice, not only taking care of pregnant and parenting students, but also giving students access to the care that they need and the information that they need to make healthy and informed decisions about their sexual and reproductive lives. So yeah, very excited for this conversation. And yeah, pass it off to Pamela.
Thank you so much. And so my name is Pamela Merritt. My pronouns are she, her, and y'all. And I am the Executive Director of Medical Students for Choice. It's a pleasure to be here and share a lot about the work that we're doing. Medical Students for Choice is celebrating our 30th anniversary this year. And we were founded in 1993, shortly after the murder of Dr. David Gunn by an anti-abortion terrorist. Medical Students for Choice was founded by medical students and continues in our 30th year to be led by a board that is 50% medical students, and the board leadership is always medical students. We have chapters in over 34 countries across the globe. Our largest membership is in the US, and our fastest growing membership is in the global South, specifically in Uganda. So what I want to talk about very quickly is why medical student organizing matters, and why people should be very, very concerned about the current post-Dobbs landscape. So just briefly, our mission at MSFC is to support student organizers and physicians in training as they advocate for abortion and family planning training on their campus. And for medical schools in the US, that is not a guarantee. There is no mandate for accreditation that requires a medical school to provide abortion training and family planning training. And so for 30 years, MSFC has been fighting on a campus by campus basis to get med schools to have a modern and comprehensive curriculum. There's no area of medicine that doesn't have to factor or consider whether or not a patient is or could get pregnant. So when we think about how many people will seek abortion service in their lifetime, 1 out of 3, this is such a common and very safe procedure. And 50% plus of the population that is capable of pregnancy deserve to be able to get medically accurate information from their physicians. So the lack of there being a consistent criteria that medical schools have to meet is alarming, and it just got worse because now medical students can't access that training and education in their community, in 12 states and with the potential of 24 total states. If there is no clinic in your community, then there is no ability to get in-clinic training, and odds are you're going to struggle to get it out of state. We've been preparing for the fall of Roe since I took over the executive director position in January of 2021, but there's no way to prepare for a historic fail. And it has surprised me in a lot of ways that I would have thought I was clever enough to anticipate. But even though abortion training and education is protected under the First Amendment, the reality is that publicly funded medical schools located in banned states face intense pressure and overt threats to their funding for continuing to offer abortion and family planning, education, and training. So that state legislatures have weaponized the budget process to attack and threaten and successfully menace them into reducing, if not eliminating, that education. Private medical schools that are in banned states are also being threatened. For example, in my home state of Missouri, the state legislature has, for the last 3 years, introduced a bill that would tax the endowment of private universities that are affiliated and have a partnership with an abortion provider, regardless of where that abortion provider is. That is a bill that has been drafted specifically to harm Washington University in St. Louis, which has one of the top medical schools in the world. We also face politically ambitious attorneys general who menace a lot of publicly funded residency programs, and they do have a criteria through the accrediting body. They need to make sure that that residents who are in the OB-GYN track actually receive abortion training and education, because if you are an OB-GYN doctor, you are required to save the life of a patient through abortion if it's necessary. But that doesn't mean that in states throughout the Midwest and the South that there are attorneys general giving legal analysis that makes it really hard for them to comply. The trick there is that residents are technically employees of the state or employees of the hospital system. So one of the reasons you're not hearing a lot from residents is that they are subject to employment law. And what we're working with our chapters in the US is that we're currently waiting for match week, where medical students get matched to their residency program. And it's incredibly frightening to have medical students basically driving blind and having to trust alumni and faculty at a residency program who say they're going to fight for their right to receive training and not know whether that happens. And then once they accept that position, they can lose their entire career simply by speaking out or trying to hold their residency program accountable. So the other thing that we're deeply concerned about is genetic counseling programs, which are something that clearly the opposition to abortion rights didn't think about. But there are some amazing genetic counseling programs. And of course, genetic counseling wasn't a factor when Roe was decided in 1973. We now have the ability to treat all manner of genetic conditions. We also have the ability to perform amazing surgery in utero, but genetic counseling also identifies fetal abnormalities or failing pregnancies that ultimately threaten not just the life of the pregnant person, but could threaten their future fertility. And right now, genetic counseling programs are scrambling because they don't know about the legality or the ethics of testing at 15 weeks when you are testing a person and giving them counseling and they live in a state where they can't do anything about it. So it's a big concern. And all of this matters because the United States has the worst pregnancy outcomes in the developed world. So most communities in the United States have a hospital system because of a residency program. So the only way they're able to provide healthcare is they have these exhausted residents who, in exchange for training in their field for 4 to 8 years, they are underpaid, overworked, and are providing healthcare. So the threat of not having residents abandoning between 12 to 24 states, or of the top students not going into residency programs in the most economically challenged areas, could decimate entire communities. And we already know that the Black and infant mortality rates in this country, in certain communities, are indefensible. Poorly trained residents will not be qualified to perform life-saving care under the exemptions in banned states. And medical students in banned states who don't receive abortion training and education can really not rely on residency programs later in their career to fill the void. So that's the work that Medical Students for Choice does. For 30 years, we've been providing training and education in some countries where abortion is illegal, so we know what we're doing. But the world is watching and is alarmed by where the United States is right now.
Thank you all for those opening statements. I think those set us off with a lot to talk about and a lot to address. So I think I'll start things off. Lauren said something that I thought was very interesting about Catholic universities being in a pre-Roe situation already and have been for a long time. And it got me thinking, I mean, I wanted to ask about this anyway. Most of us in this webinar, with all respect to our elders who may be in the audience, probably don't remember what a pre-Roe world looked like or United States looked like. And so does anybody want to speak to, and maybe Lauren, this is about like what it is like on Catholic campuses, or just like what was healthcare like, whether it was abortion and all, like Pamela said, all of the things that follow from needing to know if somebody is pregnant or could get pregnant. What was it like pre-Roe? And are we seeing a return to a pre-Roe kind of situation right now?
I can actually speak to this, and then Lauren, if you want to chime in later about just like, I think there's a differentiation between like, I guess, things that you can access on a campus, like the pre-Roe, right, versus like a general society experience of like a pre-Roe existence, right? Like right now, a Catholic student's ability to access things like through their campus, like maybe one thing, but that doesn't mean that like the healthcare outside of their campus is like in the same place that it was pre-Roe v. Wade. And I think that's like an important distinction because we, in this post-Roe world that we're in right now, we aren't like in the pre-Roe era. There are certain like messaging and imagery things that are like problematic within like the reproductive rights and the reproductive justice movement has pointed out that there are issues within the reproductive rights movement that push this narrative of like the simplest way to explain it is the wired hanger narrative, like imagery. If you're at a rally or something like that and you're seeing like, oh, a hanger and it's like maybe has like red coloring on it and it says we won't go back. I understand like the outrage that's behind that, especially for people who may have lived in like a pre-Roe existence. But that's no longer like how our medical system is set up. That's no longer like, if now that Roe v. Wade has been overturned, it's not as though like people are going to be faced with like back alley abortions as people call them. medicine, science, and like community mutual aid care, like community support outside of the confines of the United States medical industrial complex, as I like to call it. Like the abortion movement has, since before Roe v. Wade, been like forming outside of this medical industrial complex, continued throughout like Roe v. Wade being the law of the land. But like, because there were so many issues around access and Roe never ensured access, the communities, particularly Black and Brown and queer communities, created ways for their people to access abortion. And that's, through things like medication abortion. And that's like, the case that I'm sure a lot of people have heard about recently, this case that's coming out of, that I'm happy to talk about more, but we're looking at Judge Kaczmarek and a district court judge in Texas potentially eliminating access to mifepristone, one of the most commonly used abortion drugs nationwide. So not just in red states or purple states, like in every state. I'm happy to talk about that more once we reach that subject, but it's really important to acknowledge that like we aren't in a pre-Roe world. We will never go back to a pre-Roe world, and to like say that we're in a pre-Roe world is like erasure of all of the work that Black and Brown reproductive justice advocates have been doing for decades to ensure access to abortion outside of the confines of the medical industrial complex. And yeah, so that's just something like I think language is really important when you talk about access to abortion, and that's something that I think is definitely like an issue that you see when you show up to different rallies, or when you talk to, like, for me, it's like when I talk to like my mom's friends who are like older, like they understand like what it was like when they were bringing like their girlfriends to get abortions and things like that, or they were scrambling to find access to abortions. I will have to like have conversations and say, hey, like things have changed. We're not stuck with like the old ways of like getting an abortion outside of a doctor's office anymore. There's hope, at least. And like things like medication abortion give us that hope.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bridget. I really appreciate that. And I think what I meant by like, students are living in this pre-Roe reality is that they are being inundated with misinformation and disinformation by the institution that is supposedly supposed to take care of them, right? And that misinformation and disinformation was something that still exists today, like, and stuff like that. And so I just really wanted to like make clear that like access isn't so simple, even for students who are going, to private schools, right? And especially now that we don't have protections in certain states in state law, and we don't have protections in federal law, there is even more license in particular for Catholic institutions to manipulate their policies so that students are not able to get the care that they need and may be misled, like I was saying, to crisis pregnancy centers as well. There aren't legal protections anymore for students, who are not able to access this care. So yeah, it is really important to make the distinction between Roe and Dobbs. Roe was never enough in the first place. And I think like one of the things that I've been really trying to talk about, especially with students, is that this is an opportunity. Yeah, Roe is no longer the law of the land. But when it comes to enshrining protections into state constitutions, whether it's a federal abortion law, we have an opportunity to build a world that is bigger than Roe, that is bigger than just this narrow right to abortion, right? And so obviously we're coming up on a lot of challenges here, but there is, yeah, of course, we won't go back, but we need to believe in more than Roe. We need to build up what comprehensive access to sexual and reproductive health care looks like, what your ability to parent and to parent the children that you have in safe and sustainable environments looks like. And students, young people in particular, are at this point in their lives. And I think a lot of people really underestimate young people in particular around these issues. These are issues that impact young people very, very deeply. And so we should be following the lead of Black and Indigenous young people that are centering reproductive justice and doing this work and calling out how they need access to care, they need access to information, they need access to services that are able to help them make healthy and informed decisions about their reproductive lives. So yeah, so again, it's before Roe, right? I completely agree with Bridget that obviously there is a lot of you know, I guess fear mongering that has been carried into the present day, and I do not underestimate in particular, and I've been really trying to with my students, I do not underestimate the importance of medication abortion as discrete abortion care for students that are being monitored by their Catholic universities in particular. You know, like I had a student come to me and ask, am I going to get in trouble if abortion pills arrive through the mailroom? Right? So just like discrete safe abortion care via abortion pills like is the future, is hope, you know. And so I think that you know, letting students know that they can self-manage their own abortions and take care of themselves.
Uh-oh.
Laura,
Oh,
you're
did I-
back. Yeah, we just lost that last like 10 seconds. Sorry.
Oh, well, I was just saying that like discrete, safe abortion care is available to students, and emphasizing that is what's really giving me hope right now. And teaching my students how to like spread information about the medication abortion protocol is really what's giving me hope now. So we have a future in abortion access, and I think that's where it is.
So if I could just add really quickly, so I too, and I think most reproductive health rights and justice activists are thrilled that we have this awesome 2-pill or 1-pill protocol. The World Health Organization has both for self-managed abortion, and we should be grateful to, you know, amazing activists in South America who did amazing work to identify that misoprostol, you know, could be used in this way. My concern, as you know, the auntie on the panel, I'm actually 1 month younger than Roe, but my concern is always that we have this wonderful technological advancement with access to medication abortion through the internet, through apps on a phone, but the United States has not done the work to deal with the mass surveillance and incarceration of Black and Brown and Indigenous people. So what Lauren described, people facing on a Catholic campus and people going through their mail, happens every day for people who are in the social service system. If they're, you know, I know people who've had social workers going through their dresser drawers during check-in visits. And that's something that you have to deal with just because you're receiving aid. So the logical consequence of abortion bans in the modern era is incarceration. And we definitely don't have the safeguards for people who look like me in place for people to feel, you know, empowered yet through this process. I do think that people feel a sense of relief, but there's also a concern that the way we describe accessing medication abortion needs to be different for people who are highly surveilled. And, you know, we need to keep it real about, you know, the graphic details of how people, you know, go ahead and self-manage their own abortion and make sure that other people aren't aware. We need to have very clean-cut conversations with people who can experience pregnancy about the fact that when you are Black, brown, or indigenous in this country, you don't get to tell people that you self-manage your abortion. You don't get to tell people that you've got the pills, because we are facing an onslaught that is only going to get worse. And I can assure you, I mean, I will be shocked if we don't see a lot of arrests that'll be either valid or invalid about self-managed abortion. And then also the issue of pre-Roe versus post-Roe, I'll be honest, like I kind of wish it weren't so bad. Post-Dobbs is bad. It's really, really bad. Because we now have the technology in the United States, we have the ability for people to have safe pregnancies, and we just aren't doing it. And we are basically being caught up in this web of white supremacy and fear of population changes that has resulted in policies that are eugenics in their core. And as long as we're not talking about that, we can't fight it. So I can't stress enough how, pre-Roe, you had people who would provide abortions. They were illegal. If you watch the movie The Janes, it's awesome documentary. I don't know about the drama, but the documentary is fantastic. And pre-Roe, the infant or the maternal mortality rate for Black women was horrific. But the maternal mortality rate for Black women in my community is 3 to 4 times the general public now, and it will increase by 30% because of the Dobbs ruling. So to me, it's like, it's one thing to have those rates when you don't have access to care and you don't have access to something, but to have those rates in certain states when other states like California are able to really put together an actual plan to try and make sure that Black women live for a year after they give birth, it's indefensible. It's a human rights violation that is unfolding right before our eyes.
And just to follow up on some important and incredible points that Pamela just made, it is really important to note that, like, while things are not the same as they were, I guess, like medically or scientifically in this post like Roe era versus like a pre-Roe era, that doesn't mean that it's like safe and fine for people to be able to access to self-manage an abortion, particularly, as Pamela said, for Black and brown people. And I think I was at a panel recently, and they were talking about the amount of like cases that have come or have been related to people arrested for like assumptions that they self-managed their abortion or whatever. The facts, they vary, but it was like, I think 61 cases over the last like 20 something years, and a majority, if not all of those, I think it was like nearly all of those cases were for Black and brown folks. And like, you look at the case of like Lizelle Herrera in Texas, that was around the SB 8 case, who was arrested for having attempted an abortion or having attempted an abortion, was arrested by the state and was going to be charged with murder. And this was even before the Dobbs decision came down. So, there is like self-managed abortion is this thing that was like created by the reproductive justice movement for the reproductive justice movement for folks, Black and brown folks within that movement. But it's also, those are the folks who are like disproportionately impacted and criminalized and will continue to be criminalized in this post-Roe era. So, it's a scary situation. These are things that, like, I guess, like, advocates discuss certain like things that folks can say if they do choose to self-manage their abortion. Like, first and foremost, there's no like medically there's no medical difference between, or no like cognizable medical difference between an individual who has miscarried versus an individual who has taken a medication abortion pill. So if you do go in for follow-up care after having attempted to self-manage an abortion, you don't need to disclose the fact that you took an abortion pill. You can just say, oh, I was pregnant and now I'm miscarrying. Like, it's nobody's business. And then the care wouldn't be different. That's the information that we've received from like providers in the movement. And there's certain like safeguards, you know, you have to be careful about researching and like whether or not like data is like, there's like news articles coming out that like Google and Facebook are like giving information and chats over to authorities that are between people who are like trying to figure out where they can secure medication abortion pills. These are all like real risks that are out there right now and that folks are having to contend with like in this moment. So yeah, it's by no means like a better landscape, but it's a different landscape than before Roe, and it's just as violent and just as targeted towards the most vulnerable people in our society and the most like underrepresented people in our society, which is Black and brown and low income and LGBTQ folks.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, we are identifying such a huge number of intersections with the rights of people of color. I know that, I mean, queer rights is very much a part of this. And can anybody speak to how or kind of like control over reproduction fits into this, and like what interests may be at play here? Because it really seems like this is so targeted, like to control the variability of people to choose when or if they want to have children. And it's not just about forcing women to have unwanted pregnancies, but also by neglect, preventing other people from having pregnancies as well. So can anybody speak to that?
I think there's like literally a book that can answer this question for you perfectly. It's called Killing the Black Body by Professor Dorothy Roberts. And truly the most life-changing book I've ever read in my life. It just goes through the entire like history of what abortion bans are or like what restrictions on reproduction are. And it really goes into like basically the foundations of the reproductive justice movement, which is the movement that was created by Black women for Black women that recognizes that reproductive justice is to decide if, when, and how you want to have a child and to be able to raise that child in like a community and a society that they can thrive in and survive in and have like a life in. And so a lot of things intersect with that, which is like environmental justice, like class, race, gender, all of those things. You know, you think about if like there's somebody who's having to raise their child in an area that has like bad air pollution, like that's a reproductive justice issue. If somebody does want to have a child, but they don't have enough funds to be able to have a child, like that's a reproductive justice issue. And in fact, that's more so the case. More than half of people who get abortions already have children themselves and know what the like financial implications are. So like that book just really goes through and through the lens of like the Black female experience, dating back to like when Black women's bodies were seen as like chattel, like slave chattel, and like able to like were utilized so that they could be like have like a financial incentive for the United States to, you know, take over the like reproductive futures of Black women, to create more slaves, to like generate the economy. And like the entire United States is based off of like this racist control over Black women's bodies, you know, our entire like financial system. It really goes through this entire history, but it all comes back to control. It all comes back to like racism, classism, sexism. We still see it today. We see it like on every level. And like there's lots of different layers as to what this control is rooted in. It's rooted in fear of the other. It's rooted in like our patriarchal society. It's rooted in like anybody who's not cis het white male like is of, you know, deemed somebody that needs to be dominated by the patriarchal society. So like there's a lot of different layers, but it all comes back to control. It all comes back to like racism and classism, in my opinion, but I'll let my colleagues speak to it.
So, I mean, I agree that it's control, but I think there's a comma at the end of that and not a period. Because I think that at the root of everything is white supremacy. And, there's the movie The Exorcist, which I can't believe I'm talking about on a secular student alliance call, but I'm a St. Louisan. We all watch The Exorcist every year. So like it took place in St. Louis. So the Exorcist has this scene where the priest is talking, the old priest is talking to the young priest. And the young priest, who's a psychiatrist, is trying to give him a rundown of all of the different psycho things that they've seen. And the old priest cuts him off and he says, and he's like, there's only one. There's only one demon. There's only one. And I feel myself doing that a lot in dialogue, which is, there are so many symptoms of white supremacy, but the devil is white supremacy. And that it might sound scary, but we need to wrap our head around the fact that laws are being passed to breed certain people. And laws will be passed because with positive eugenics, negative eugenics comes to limit the reproductive potential, if not sterilize certain people. All of this can be seen it accompanies building a wall. It accompanies, stopping people before they can seek refuge in the United States. It accompanies incentivizing certain immigrants and not incentivizing other immigrants. Every single voting right pullback has been based on race and based not just in racism, but white supremacy. How do we take away power from a growing brown population? Like the largest population growth is actually Hispanic. How do we take that power and limit it? And how do we guarantee power for a privileged percent of white folks? And basically, these people in power have weaponized racism to the point where people will act against their own best interests, just as long as they can deny somebody who's Black, brown, or indigenous some sort of right. But ultimately, like, this is America's original sin. We have tried to circumnavigate it for years. And right now, that's what we're seeing. We are seeing just this ugly last death rattle, and it could actually revive the beast, so to speak. So I don't see any difference between anti-trans legislation and restricting bodily autonomy. And I think, it's a violation of human rights, but it also serves a purpose. And I think it's super important that we understand what the goal is, who it benefits, and who's being used or cultivated, what is being done in the name of some to many. And but you cannot dismantle what you won't acknowledge. So I think it's absolutely critical.
Yeah, I really thank you, Pamela, for raising that. I think as far as like the modern day political anti-abortion movement, I didn't know until recently that the modern day anti-choice movement started from the battle of school segregation. It was not okay any longer to be outwardly racist. And so essentially folks the school segregation movement pivoted their reasoning to being like, well, actually, school segregation goes against my religious freedom, right? And that argument was rejected as well. And so at the time, these folks were thinking, okay, so we can't use school segregation to get people out to the polls at this point. What do we do next? And someone suggested abortion because of the sort of convenience of the fetus. And I use quotation marks, to talk about it because, you don't have to acknowledge nuance when it comes to the fetus. You can create a lot, like we've seen the junk science that has been created about fetuses and about embryology and stuff like that. It's a very like, there's a nun, I can't remember her name exactly. She says the unborn is a very convenient group to advocate on behalf of. And so I don't want to underestimate, connected to the white supremacy, the way that religion, and in particular Christianity, is tied to white supremacy and enacting these kinds of legislations and making like the symptoms of white supremacy manifest in the way that, in the ways that we are being controlled about our, as far as our reproduction, as far as our bodily autonomy and our ability to parent. Like I talk a lot about to students in particular with Catholic doctrine, the same teachings that are used to essentially condemn abortion in the Catholic tradition are the same teachings that are also used to condemn homosexuality and queer people and trans people in the Catholic tradition. And so I just want to really emphasize, like, especially because we're on a Secular Student Alliance webinar, right? The white supremacy is obsessed with freedom of religion, but what we're missing is the other part of the Establishment Clause is freedom from religion, right? And so it's really like, I think one of a lot of the things that like my student organizers are really pushing as far as values is like, yes, free exercise, great. But what does imposing a certain religious doctrine onto people who do not share that religious doctrine or have a religious doctrine at all impacts their lives? And that is not fair. That is a symptom of white supremacy. And it's just a way to, especially with religion, it's a way to communicate, as like in the law, or you hear sometimes in like Supreme Court cases, sincerely held beliefs into society and into policy and the ways that our lives are impacted. So just wanting to raise that that religious freedom aspect of white supremacy.
And thank you for doing that. I was actually going to throw in a question to see if you could make that connection. And frankly, I'll say that we have great folks in the secular movement who are very much involved in racial justice organizing and fighting against white supremacy. But I think that in our secular movement, sometimes religion just becomes the devil, and that's at the root of all of our problems. And so I'd like to stay on this question of the connection between religion and white supremacy, whether you want to take it from a historical perspective, how it's been used to support, the view of Black bodies as being chattel, or how that's evolved through the days of Jim Crow and the incarceration state. But is any kind of angle you want to take with it to help us connect those dots? Because I think that's an important thing for folks in our secular community to understand.
Yeah, so I'll take the first stab at it, which is that, the history of the United States can be chartered by the use of, or religion being used to pave the way and justify all manner of genocide and atrocities of land stealing, etc. So, religion was used to justify, people going into Africa and taking half of the population of a continent. Religion was justified for separating mothers from their children, tearing families apart. Religion was justified for the Civil War, and definitely was justified for the backlash against Reconstruction. It's important that, I know they're taking history out of schools, but the reality is that the Bible was the primary tool for messaging around segregation and Jim Crow. It is the reason why Black people couldn't marry white people, why Protestants couldn't marry Catholics in certain places. It's been used in beautifully and skillfully to drive a wedge between folks, and but it also has been used to justify some of the most horrible things that have happened, not just in this country, but across the world. So when we think about, I've heard a lot of people talk about, things that were legal and constitutional. And I have a visceral reaction when people talk about what is constitutional, because the oppression of me and my body, everything about me was constitutional. And the fact that I'm sitting here in dialogue with y'all is not because the Constitution did a great job. It's because people had to, fight and claw and die, or damn near die and die, in order to force the Constitution to sort of live up to what it says it delivers for American citizens. So I think the same can be said of religion, and the fact that more Americans are moving away from organized religion in droves, particularly folks who are younger than millennials. The numbers are huge. I think is directly connected to how they don't see religion as a positive, uplifting, empowering thing. In my lifetime as a Gen Xer, I have seen religion become something unrecognizable to me, as somebody who's raised in the church and was raised in the church as an instrument for justice and civil rights. I was raised in a Black Baptist church. The whole purpose of going to church was to find and nurture your moral compass, go out into the world and try and make it a better place. And I don't see that even in Black traditional churches the way that I used to. But you cannot underestimate that, the Bible is a very useful tool. And I'm also fascinated, just as an aside, that as I went to Vacation Bible School one too many times growing up. It was, a lot. But, people who quote from the Bible as the word of God, and then when you actually open it up, you're like, it's not even purporting to be like, it's the book of John, for God's sake. They're even saying, hey, John wrote this. So I think that religion has been unexamined of late. People are like absolutist, and a lot of them are quoting their pastor. They're not quoting from religious text. But as somebody who has seen the good, the bad, and the ugly of it in my own life, I think we can't underestimate how the fusion of religion and public policy, and it can be very dangerous, and particularly because there is no one religion, and the devil's in the details. So, it's infuriating when you see how the backslide is it's always predictable, and it always kicks off in the name of faith.
I thank you so much, Pamela, for raising that. And like, as a young Catholic person myself, like I did grow up in a community where like the Catholicism that I learned about was really rooted in social justice and really rooted and supporting and centering the poor and the marginalized. And so I do agree 100% that religion has gone unexamined. And connected to that in particular is because religion has gone unexamined, most people don't realize that the majority of people of faith are actually pro-choice, which is incredible. The Public Religion Research Institute just released a brand new study. It's called the American Values Atlas, and they did a study about abortion in particular, and people from different faith traditions. as well as separated out by different racial and ethnic groups, like within those religious traditions. And the vast majority, the vast majority of the religious traditions presented in that study, most of the respondents, the majority of the respondents, said that they supported abortion being legal in all or most cases. So it's also about showing the reality of people that belong to these religious traditions, right? Because I think what also has gone unexamined is the few people that have so much power as a result of white supremacy, as a result of the way that this country was built. In particular, on Christianity, or the certain view of Christianity. The Catholic Church, as far as like lobbying money, spends millions and perhaps billions. We're not sure, because they don't have to do a whole lot of lobby disclosure, because they are a church. Millions and perhaps billions of dollars on lobbying against again, abortion legislation. We're talking about anti-trans and anti-queer legislation as well. The Catholic Church is intimately involved. The Catholic Church, and I say capital C Church, is intimately involved in funding the political efforts to create the country that they want to create. But it's ordinary, everyday people of faith that really matter. And so I think part of my work, even though SCRJ is a secular organization, is also opening up students that, attend religious universities. The continuity within religious education, I feel like, is very strong. Like, I went to Catholic high school, and now I went to Catholic college as well. And so it's opening up people to the idea that, there are different ways to live out your faith. And you're not alone being a pro-choice person of faith, or a pro-queer rights person of faith. Just there is so many, as far as religion going unexamined, I think we also need to talk about everyday people of faith as well. So just wanted to raise that.
All right. I do want to, we're running a bit out of time, but I want to keep this going because I want to talk about what can our students do to advance the fight for reproductive justice, whether it's access, whether it's defending medication abortion. I mean, just whatever it is. Can people throw out some tips, some places to go? We already had one book, Killing the Black Body, thrown out that people can read. So it can be stuff to read, organizations get involved in, or things that they can organize on their campus.
Yeah, I will say that definitely read Killing the Black Body. You can also read a book called Reproductive Justice by Loretta Ross. That's also a really important book on reproductive justice, and just like the foundation and everything you need to know. But also I think like donating, or like doing some type of getting together with a group of friends and finding a way to raise money amongst your student body, and then donate that money to like abortion funds that are maybe in your region, or in a region that's experiencing like an abortion ban or abortion restrictions. There's a lot of misunderstanding about how abortion funds work, like particularly in a state, for instance, like Alabama, where there no longer is like abortion access. There is like these funds play really important roles in like bridging the gap for folks. So like they will find a way to like help a person take a train or a flight to a state where they can get abortion access. These funds will help pay for somebody's like childcare, so that like they don't have to worry about what their children are going to be doing while they're going to get an abortion, or like helping somebody like fill in, pay for the gas money so that they can take a car to a different state. Just like anywhere that they need funds to get their abortion, that's what abortion funds fall in and take care of. So just because abortion is banned in a state doesn't mean that those abortion funds aren't working double time, triple time to ensure that people have the funds that they need to get the care that they need. So I would say, work with your friends and uh raise some money. And then I think like something else is talking about abortion, destigmatizing it as much as you possibly can. You have no idea how far a conversation with somebody that maybe is like pro-choice, which like you can turn someone who's pro-choice into pro-abortion through conversation and just sharing some different facts and statistics, meeting them where they're at. Like, especially if you're a white person, like as a white person in this movement, I'm constantly trying to think about ways that I can like bring in white folks in a way that's not harmful and like do my job as a white person in this movement so that like people of color who are disproportionately impacted by abortion restrictions don't have to do that labor. It's like, talk to your racist auntie and uncle, have a conversation, like be like, look, let's sit down and have this conversation and like figure out where you're coming from here. And like, sure, you don't have to like, feed into like the nonsense that they're spewing at you, but like try to find a way to do that like emotional and labor with them, as long as it's safe, to get them to a place where they can hear you and understand where you're coming from. Like break down those like different barriers of abortion stigma and like work within your community to do that. And also like DC Abortion Fund, that's a if you are like local to the DC area, that's an abortion fund that's constantly looking for like support, constantly holding like fundraisers and things like that you can take part in.
Yeah, thanks so much for lifting that up, Bridget. I think like busting abortion stigma is so important on behalf of young people, because this is often also, college students this is often the first time they're becoming sexually active, like for the first time in your life. And so having conversations about abortion stigma and destigmatizing abortion is so important as people are starting to become sexually active and making these decisions about their lives. On top of fundraising, the work that I do in particular with students on campus, and again, this doesn't have to be just a Catholic campus thing, is that we are really building practical support and a mutual aid group on campus by coordinating with community clinics, organizations like SCRJ, like Advocates for Youth, to get preventative care to students free of charge. Which is just honestly has been the delight of the last 6 years of my life, passing out condoms to students on public property. It's wonderful. And so for letting your campus community know that you are a trusted and safe person to come to about these really like sensitive and morally complex issues is just paramount. It's essential. And being able to provide preventative care is great. A lot of what my students in particular, now more than ever, post-jobs are doing is that they are helping coordinate care for students who need access to abortion. And they are doing that through relationships with abortion funds. And relationships with community clinics. So also you can reach out and build a relationship with an abortion fund and build a relationship with the community clinic, being like, hey, I'm really passionate about abortion access. Would you be okay if I referred students to you so that they can schedule their abortion care with you? Also, again, spreading like good information and safe and accurate information about abortion and about sexual and reproductive health care is paramount. Sharing the medication abortion protocol with people is a great way to go about it. But like, again, I think that students have a lot of power to build practical support and mutual aid networks. And it's been done. It's continuing to be done on campus. And so just don't be afraid to dip your toes into that process, because I've just from my own experience and then continuing to work with students today is that existing organizations, community clinics, adults are willing to help you. They care about you too. So even if your university isn't caring about you, immediately, other adults in the community care about you and care about your ability to access this care. So yeah, I think that's a couple ways that folks can get involved.
That's so awesome. The overarching umbrella that I want to share is that students should be fearless. That anybody who tells you that caution is the path that will get us back where we need to be is wrong. I'm right. No, just kidding. But it's all been tried before. So when people tell you that you shouldn't talk about abortion and dismantle stigma, know that was tried and it didn't save Roe. When people tell you that you should try to appeal to folks and dilute or not talk about racism or not talk about white supremacy, we tried that. It did not work. So I think it's important for, as somebody who's an older generation, what I often say is just don't buy it because it didn't work. And that doesn't mean that people didn't try really hard. You can have a postmortem that acknowledges the spirit of activism, but also acknowledges that the last thing I have any right to say to somebody who is on a campus right now is be careful. And somebody who is within reproductive age, no, you could be fearless. You should be daring. You should think outside the box. You should call up big organizations, those resources onto your campus. You don't have to agree with them to take their condoms, to take their lube, to take all of their stuff and use it. But the most important thing is that we have to be bold and we must not celebrate compromise as victory. People are making decisions right now that will impact your life right now. And they're doing it without young people in the room. So when we talk about ballot initiatives, some of them are problematic as hell, and they're being railroaded through without insight. So now is the time. There's no expert. There's no abortion rights activist school. You just literally get online, send an email to pamela@msfc.org and ask for help. And I know that my colleagues on this call are also eager to help and connect, but the students are this is your world. This is the world that you're going to be rebuilding. So thank you for your activism, and I'm happy to support in any way.
Thank you. I mean, that was a great closing to this webinar. I think this has been an incredible panel. I'm kind of thinking I want to do part 2 because there's so much more that we could talk about, and you all are such great people to have this conversation with. And just to echo Pamela's point, I couldn't agree more. And I mean, I named this the struggle for abortion rights because I didn't want to shy away from the word abortion, and because in the words of Frederick Douglass, without struggle there is no progress, and we have to fight for what we want and be fearless about it. And ask for everything and demand everything, not just because if you only demand a little bit, you're just going to get a little bit. That's it. So I put my email. If anybody has any questions following, you can direct them to me or to the other folks putting their email into the chat. And I can help get those answered for you, get you connected with folks. We got some great practical advice of what to do for going forward. So thank you all so much for being here. Please do tune in next month. You can go to secularstudents.org/webinars and see our last webinar of the semester is going to be a secular Seder. It's a celebration of Passover. And you don't need a god to celebrate the liberation story that is Passover. And it's also my favorite Jewish holiday because you eat the whole time. So thank you all for being here. Please join us for that. And then also check out our Secular Student Alliance national conference, which is happening June 16th through 18th. And I will certainly be reaching out to our panelists to come join us at the conference as well, and to continue having these and other conversations. Thank you all again so much for being here. This is fabulous. And you all have a great evening.